Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. This is probably the latest I've ever recorded anything for YouTube. Tonight we're going to be doing the third installment of our seminar on Sir James George Frazer's The Golden Bough. And I don't know, do you have anything to say before we get into it, Jordan?
No, let's get to it.
All right, we have a lot to cover.
Yes.
I will say that the approach that I have to all this is very explorative. We're looking for a lot of different connections. In the middle of this presentation, I give the meat and the potatoes of Frazer's view, but it's bookended by a lot of detective work. So with saying that, let's get into it. Tonight, our focus will be Chapter 3, Section 3, The Magician's Progress, and Chapter 4, Magic and Religion. Much was unearthed in preparation, resulting in intentional and somewhat arbitrary edits so as to avoid an unwieldy presentation. That which is adumbrated today will likely be enriched the deeper we go into our study. The Golden Bough touches on so much of modern life. Kubrick was right to rebuke John Crowley for calling it mere mythology. Here's what we are going to accomplish today. Last time, we closed by indexing instances of magic in Kubrick's films. We begin by continuing that thread. Not everything covered is sympathetic magic, but some other variant that may connect to a previously unexplored section. 2, also in the previous video, a spontaneous conversation between us broke out regarding the distinctions between magic, science, and religion. Tonight, a more adequate solution to those questions will be provided. If you'll recall, I felt uneasy answering Jordan's questions with finality. And there's still more to toy with here, but finally, I think I'll be able to address her concerns. 3, next we will come to understand the evolution of religion from magic. And finally, we will track how a very particular passage from the Golden Bough concerning the Mass of Saint-Secaire led to a thrilling research dig into the sex cult of Eyes Wide Shut, the Beatles, Aleister Crowley, and the ending of 2001. So that is why you'll see here, you're like, why do we have, it's quite animated on Jordan's screen, but you can see the still or the animation of the Beatles in Strawberry Fields Forever from the Magical Mystery Tour. We've got a little Jack Parsons here, Aleister Crowley and Kubrick behind the camera, along with James Frazer. Don't freak out too much about it, Jordan. It's not that big a deal.
Okay, I can probably pull up the other one. Are there animations later?
Animations throughout this whole thing, but the real ones know that background image there is from Strawberry Fields Forever, the music video.
I think I just swapped them out.
Okay, we'll worry about that later. So let's go to slide 2. And there are no animations here. Oh, wait, there is. I'm sorry. There's Dave going through the Stargate. You've got it. That's fine. It's a still on your end. So let me read this here. To begin, in the previous presentation, our discussion led to a potential revelation that cinema itself, and perhaps the greater screen mediums, could be thought of as sympathetic magic. Questions pondered included, how are the figures on our screens different from voodoo dolls that are affected for the sake of negative or positive outcomes? Would it be an oversimplification to think of propaganda as a form of sympathetic magic? I don't think we have a full answer for those questions today. However, it did strike me that Kubrick was sensitive to it. For the background to this slide, I've included the discussion of the Donner Party in The Shining and how cannibalism has been normalized via the television. This foreshadows the horrific events to occur at the Overlook Hotel. Just how deeply did Kubrick understand the images, though they be not something we can push pins into, can shape outcomes? It may help us to review Marshall McLuhan's famous books, such as The Medium is the Massage, since Kubrick was such a fan, and McLuhan, and this research is very tentative, touched on the Golden Bough in his writings, but that is for a future presentation. If Kubrick understood that images asserted something like a sympathetic magic effect upon the viewer, does that change how we understand what is happening in 2001 when humanity encounters the monolith on 4 separate occasions? Did Kubrick see his work, especially 2001, as ushering individuals and perhaps the collective into a new stage of consciousness? What was the real message of Dave traveling through the Stargate and assuming the form of what many call the Star Child? Later in this presentation, I offer reasons for thinking we may want to rename it the Moon Child. So if we want to take a look at these images real quick, Jordan.
Yeah.
For the background image here, we have, Danny telling his parents that he saw cannibalism on the TV, and Jack's like, see, it's okay, he saw it on television. And I love this image of Marshall McLuhan. I don't know if you're familiar with Marshall McLuhan. He's a great media theorist, very shaped a lot of critical theory in that era. But when I was going over my notes today, I've got him standing next to a voodoo doll. I just like this image, but it dawned on me later that he's on top of a television that is an image of him. So it kind of accidentally, it was just the one that I grabbed. I just thought it looked cool and moved on. Didn't actually realize that that was him. So you see him and his double. So it kind of lends credence to this idea that there is some connectivity between our images on the screen and who we are in real life. Although I don't want to, I'm not prepared to bring McLuhan into this conversation of magic and cinema and television just yet. I have a feeling it would be very fruitful to look at him in that way.
That's a really peculiar picture.
It is. I think it's really deep. I think it's really deep the more I meditated on it. So now I've been kind of just talking a lot. Do you want to interject anything, or are you happy to run the slide projector right now?
There's so much packed in to this particular presentation. I think let's keep chugging along if that works for you.
Okay. All right. So let's go to slide 23. Last presentation, we spoke about the Theseus, Minotaur, and Ariadne dynamic in The Shining, which led to a conversation about finding Ariadne's magical threads to get out of the labyrinth. I failed to mention that we have clear references to magical threads with Danny's handmade Apollo 11 sweater. In related fashion, we see Danny wearing a football Mickey sweater, which emphasizes our need to have these threads to exit the maze. Otherwise, we are trapped mice. Clearly, the threads lead back to Apollo, which provokes wild speculation that many aim to squash. That conversation at this point in 2025 is a bit stale, but I think we may be able to infuse it with new life by the end of our talk today. So a lot of this is just housekeeping. Oh, and I got this image. I got this collage from Sidewinder 69 blog, which is pretty cool. You should check that out. Yeah, because last time we were looking at Jack and the maze and clearly looking like the Minotaur, but
yes,
here we have, here we clearly have threads. The Danny's sweater is woven with threads with, yarn. So
yeah, the football in the Mickey Mouse one is standing out to me in this moment.
Yeah, I've done other things where I've talked about that there's a connection to the behaviorist Watson that Kubrick came in contact with when he was doing Clockwork Orange, when trying to understand the worth of the individual and what exactly constitutes the mind. I have a feeling that spilled over into The Shining. I need to redo all of those presentations and more visually. So talk about that sometime. But for right now, I think it's, here we have Ariadne and her magical threads. When we're talking about this metaphor, it's not the threads are not always referred to as magical, and what makes a magical thread. But I think at some point, I'm just indexing this. I believe the story is going to come up in the Golden Bough. We haven't hit it yet. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it'll be there waiting for us. All right, let's go to the next slide.
Oh boy.
Okay, yeah. No, this is one. Yeah. All right, so we're on 24.
Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah, and Dr. Strangelove. This is one of the most fascinating discoveries I made since our last presentation. Careful students of Kubrick have likely picked up on references to the Beatles and his works, or know that there were talks of collaboration behind the scenes. For instance, Kubrick was approached to film a Lord of the Rings movie featuring the Beatles, but he declined. Why is this relevant? Kubrick seemed to have a particular interest in the Beatles' record, Magical Mystery Tour. In A Clockwork Orange, we see it placed in the background behind the 2001 soundtrack. Further, the mysterious dog or bear suit, whatever we're calling this in The Shining, certainly seems to match the aesthetic of the album cover costumes. So, why is Kubrick directing our attention to this album? And to try and answer that question, I watched it, and I made Jordan watch it as well. Pretty cool. I liked it. It was zany and bizarre, but I liked it. I can't believe I hadn't seen it before.
I saw it a long time ago, but I didn't know what I know now.
Yeah.
And just so much of not even symbolism, just coming right out and saying certain things really astounded me on this view.
I think it really resonated with you, especially the Fool on the Hill song, and thinking about what those lyrics really mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward if you ask me. But
if you know, you know. If you know, you know. I think we were talking a little bit about this. I'm like, I worry about how these presentations come off, because it's like you kind of have to know a few things to find this interesting, or relevant. So let's go to slide 25. My slides are being so slow tonight.
It's up though.
Okay. Well, I need to get my notes.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. All right. So this is a great, I like this collage.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The Dr. Strangelove.
While the lads are on the tour bus, and this is in the Magical Mystery Tour, they are instructed to look out the window to see something interesting. At that very moment, they see landscapes with psychedelic filters on them, just like we see as Dave goes through the Stargate in 2001. The Magical Mystery Tour came out in 1967, and 2001 didn't come out until 1968. So unless this is a coincidence, Kubrick is perhaps referencing the film. The idea that this is a coincidence becomes remote when we learn that the landscape footage spliced into the Magical Mystery Tour are outtakes from Kubrick's Strangelove. So it shows up in 2001, and Strangelove shows up in Magical Mystery Tour. This is so strange. And there is a narration accompanying these images. Away in the sky, beyond the clouds, live 4 or 5 magicians. By casting wonderful spells, they turn the most ordinary coach trip into a magical mystery tour. If you let yourselves go, the magicians will take you away to marvelous places. Maybe you've been on a magical mystery tour without even realizing it. So, what was Kubrick trying to say here? Did he fashion himself the mysteriously alluded to fifth magician? Was he merely nicking a visual idea from the Beatles because they nicked his footage, or is something deeper being communicated here, perhaps about the role of magic in both spacefaring and the nuclear arms race? So that's very heavy stuff if you let it sink in.
Well, we opens you talking about propaganda.
What are you trying to say, Jordan?
Well, perhaps we've all been on a magical mystery tour via propaganda. Where does the film start and end?
You said it, not me. Don't. How's my audio, by the way? I'm not peaking, am I? I know I'm talking a little bit louder than I was during the warm-up.
I think you're good.
Okay. Yeah, go check it out. You can watch it on YouTube. Oh no, maybe I watched it on Internet Archive. So
we did, yeah.
Okay. All right. So slide 26. Cruising a Genii magazine forum. I didn't know there was a Genii magazine. I found this interesting entry concerning Kubrick's interaction with magicians. Andy Galloway posted on January 16th, 2022. I don't know if Stanley Kubrick had a personal interest in magic, but Frank Berry, the Canadian actor, comedian, and magician, played one of the bomber crew in the opening scenes of Dr. Strangelove, and is seen manipulating a deck of cards. Michael Bailey, a former president of the Magic Circle, made a brief appearance as a street conjurer, and Barry Lyndon and David Burgess was also the gambling advisor on this film. So Kubrick certainly had contact with magicians. I want to thank Andy for that. That was, how else are you going to find that except for, like, you're deep on like stagecraft magic websites. Like that's, and this obviously caught my eye. I had never heard of who Michael Bailey was or what the Magic Circle was. And, this opens up a real can of worms. In the top right-hand corner is an image of Frank Berry from Strangelove I was able to find, but I really want to focus on David Burgess, who is here. He's the background of this slide on the set of Barry Lyndon. He's behind the camera. And Michael Bailey, who you see here on the cover of Mum magazine. How could you forget, if you have a subscription to Mum magazine? And here's a book that he wrote called The Magic Circle, which we'll get to in a second. David Burgess is from Wikipedia, was a German-born British magician and mentalist. His secret technique of locating a particular card within a pack, the Burgess effect, has been described as the holy grail of card magic. He's one of the first magicians to appear on UK television. I guess that's like pick a card, any card. The Magic Circle presented him with the coveted gold medal in the year 2000, which at the time had only been presented 6 times before since 1926. In 1995, he received the Maskelyne Award for Outstanding Contribution to British Magic, and in October 2011, received the Magic Circle's highest international award, the David Devant. Okay, I want to dwell a little more on the Magic Circle and how it may connect to Eyes Wide Shut. You can see here that Michael Bailey was once the president of the Magic Circle and wrote an authoritative book on the group entitled The Magic Circle, Performing Magic Through the Ages. And here is just a quick description of it from Amazon. The Magic Circle has for 100 years been one of the most talked about secret organizations in Britain. But what happens behind the closed doors of this intriguing society that only admits the most gifted magicians? In this fascinating history of the Magic Circle and magical performers, Former President Michael Bailey reveals how the society was created and what it stands for in a day where magic has become more and more sophisticated. Using his unique knowledge of the inside of this worldwide phenomenon, he documents the origins of magical performance and the subsequent beginnings of the society, including how it has changed in its 100 years of existence. Had no idea there was a magic circle society. So of particular interest to us is that the Magic Circle Club shares the same insignia as the game featured at the end of Eyes Wide Shut. One of the main differences being that the organization's logo in Docilis Pravata Loci, excuse my Latin, it means not apt to disclose secrets or keep mum. That's why he's on Mum magazine, right? Is replaced with Deluxe Bag of Tricks. Perhaps the message here is just to reinforce the role of secrecy in the plot of Eyes Wide Shut, but one suspects that is not the complete message. So, I've watched a lot of video essays and read a lot about all this stuff. Never in a million years did I hear anything about a potential connection between this Magic Circle game and the Magic Circle Club of British magicians. That feels like a really big deal. Maybe I just don't know enough about magic and the occult and whatnot. The fact that these are practically the same logo with the exception of the motto. I don't know. Do you recall seeing this red magic circle in many places? I think you're more familiar with that stuff than I am.
I mean, it's the zodiac. It's I've seen that many places.
Right.
Unique to this, but it's interesting.
I'm just talking about the color scheme, and I don't know. Maybe I'm making too much out of it.
I don't think so. It definitely, in my mind, does feel very associated with the imagery in Eyes Wide Shut. There's a lot of red being used, especially in the opening shots in the apartment and just the magic circles in general. But
well, we're going to be talking about magic circles a lot, and I hope that I can't remember off the top of my head if Frazer's going to talk about that later on. I assume he will.
Yeah,
but the magic circle is a big deal. As I looked into it a little bit, I mean, generally they're kind of considered like a space of protection that like a magician will get inside.
Sure.
And we see things like, we see what we might want to talk about as magic circles in Eyes Wide Shut, where like the main ritual happens. But we'll get to that in a little bit.
Faust. We spoke about that, I think, previously.
I forget where we talked about Faust, but I probably talked was when I did that Young on different types of art, psychological art. So yeah. All right, let's go to slide 27. I think it's just awesome. This painting of Kubrick. So this is like amazing. This is Christiane Kubrick is still alive. Kubrick's third wife, I believe. She's an incredibly talented painter. Her paintings show up all over in Kubrick's films. You'll see them in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Where else do you see them?
Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh, yeah, they're in Eyes Wide Shut. In Eyes Wide Shut. But this is incredible, right? Like, it's called Conjuring Stanley. She sold it. I don't know how long it sold. She sold it for $12,000 or 12,000 pounds. But you see him as kind of, he's got cards up his sleeves, like he's wearing, this
and in his
shirt
pocket.
All in his pocket and whatnot. And you see the white rabbit, right? So that's clearly an allusion to not only to like stage magicians, right, who pull rabbits out of hats and things like that, but also Alice in Wonderland, right? And so throughout Kubrick, you will see both of those themes in his work. I mean, most notably, you see it in Barry Lyndon. There's actually a magic show where a white rabbit is produced, and it's this whole thing. I think I talked about this last time, like this whole thing about birthday connections,
Mm-hmm.
feeding into this, what I believe is a riddle about Sir Isaac Newton. There's a white rabbit in Full Metal Jacket as well. I believe one of the soldiers picks it up and explodes. It's like it's covering a landmine or something like that. And there's all sorts of Alice in Wonderland references in Kubrick's work. I mean, one of the characters in Eyes Wide Shut is named Alice, and
Mm-hmm.
the main posters for the movie have Alice watching herself in a looking glass, a mirror. So these themes are all over there. I think it's interesting. I don't know I haven't thought too much. I didn't go too deep on it, but I don't know what this like blue hat is. It's probably a very personal thing. It's probably his dog. I hadn't gone too deep on it, but what did you notice about this?
We've got the lion that seems
Ooh, where's the lion?
quite crushed. It's behind the vase.
Oh, that is fascinating. Well, Kubrick is a Leo.
That's right. That's right. I also, maybe unintentionally, am reminded of the Mithras cult, etc., that we explored with some of the Young material a long time
Yeah.
ago.
What about Mithras? Refresh my memory as far as like the lion-headed god. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, which comes up in a lot of different, not quite Christian, but like different different things. Like the demiurge looks like a lion, but also in the Bible there's a lot of stuff with lions.
Yeah.
So the lion as a symbol is super interesting. But yeah, he's a Leo, so that might be the more straightforward.
That's fascinating. I think there's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and the blue goblet's very peculiar to me. It's kind of like a ceremonial.
Yeah, it almost looks like
it's not just a cup.
Yeah, it almost looks like a grail, but
it does look like a grail. That's exactly what I was thinking.
We've
been seeing golden retrievers across a lot of different things. I don't think this probably comes up in Frazer. Golden retrievers specifically are not in the Penguin.
I don't know if it's a golden retriever. I don't know if it's a golden retriever.
It looks maybe like a lab.
Yeah.
But just that colored dog, it keeps appearing in different things.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. So all this talk about magic, it was impossible for me not to think about The Wizard of Oz.
Oh,
right?
Of course.
And what's that?
Oh, just of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to find that The Wizard of Oz comes up a great deal in this. Yeah. So, it's so strange. I think like in 2013, there were like Katerina Kubrick hosted an Ask Me Anything on Reddit. Or maybe she just posted this on Reddit. She was like, yeah, she listed like Kubrick's like favorite films. And then she said, and I think the one about White Men Can't Jump being one of his favorite films is makes all the sense in the world once you watch it and you kind of get some of the jokes that are in it. But it's very subtle. But supposedly he hated The Wizard of Oz, which is like super weird on a lot of different levels. Like I've never encountered anyone who hated The Wizard of Oz. And if he hated it so much, again, it's one of those, he references it throughout his films, most notably in Eyes Wide Shut. Again, you see here, like Tom Cruise's character, Bill Harford, gets his costume from the shop, or I guess the Under the Rainbow shop. Right? And there's a very famous exchange when Bill's between the two models and they go, do you want to go where the rainbow ends? And there's all like, as if he's like this Dorothy character going between two worlds. So it doesn't really make sense to me why he hated Oz so much if he acknowledges it in his films. I think there's a couple reasons why. Maybe he, being an insider, he would have known about how Judy Garland was treated. And so with some she she didn't have the easiest time. That's what I'll leave it at that when she was on the set of The Wizard of
Mhm.
Oz. And so maybe he felt deep sympathy for her. I think also he was aware of the myth of him being the Wizard of Oz or coming off as like this godlike figure who was like controlling the perception of reality, even while he was still alive. And I think he kind of hated that. This is my own speculation. I think he hated being kind of seen as like an Oz figure because
The
they're
magician
implicated.
behind the curtain.
Yeah. And you can see, I didn't make this graphic where this is a still rip from his D.W. Griffith Acceptance Speech Award, which is his own first and only public speech that he ever did. And someone, clearly, they merged it with the Great and Powerful Oz footage because so many people have made that connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are at least I would bet that those are at least two of the reasons, and he dealt with MK Ultra in A Clockwork Orange, like he was familiar with
Right.
those research projects, and some people have claimed this. I don't know. I don't know this for certain that the Wizard of Oz was used in some of those programs, but I don't know. Can't affirm or deny that.
Yeah, I've read books claiming that
Mm-hmm.
as well. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
just speculating, not truth here. Okay, let's. All right, let's. I thought it would make a good idea to use the Wizard of Oz to kind of as a lens that will view some of today's subjects. So now we're getting into the meat of the Frazer text. So we're going to look at 3.4, The Magician's Progress. Frazer concludes the discussion of sympathetic magic by noting that most magic discussed thus far is done for the private weal or woe of an individual. In savage society, there is also public magic, which is practiced for the sake of the community. In these scenarios, the magician takes on the role of a public functionary. It is even possible, as their influence grows, that the magician may ascend to the rank of chief or king. Frazer contends there are many sincere magicians. However, the sharpest minds in time realize that they possess no real dark powers and are more or less conscious deceivers of the public, like the Wizard of Oz. The most cunning individuals are likely to end up commanding the most authority. The honest fools who legitimately believe in their craft are in great danger from the public, or are in greater danger from the public than their deceitful contemporary for failure to meet unrealistic expectations. The shrewd rogue, once he has gratified his selfish pursuits, may turn his attention to actually serving the populace he tricked. The public magician shifts savage society away from the oligarchy of elders to that of a monarchy, where power is concentrated in the hands of the ablest man. And as Frazer further argues, sets the stage for the emergence of civilization out of savagery. One man in a position of supreme power foments rapid societal development, conquest, and empire. Though abhorrent to most moderns, gives rise to the spread of art, science, and modern liberal views. Therefore, absolute despotism, says Frazer, is to be preferred to the apparent freedom of savage life. Magic may be erroneous and the cause of great harm. However, it is also a civilizing force that has given rise to science, freedom, and truth. I think this is really deep. What to say about this? I as I was reading back my own writing there, it got me to thinking about, the acceleration. Acceleration is a big theme in Kubrick's works, especially 2001, as humanity is accelerated with this interaction with the monolith. And what one man, perhaps cunning, but then turned benevolent, has a benevolent magician, how much he would be able to accelerate his society if put into that position. I think that's really deep.
Mm-hmm. It makes me curious about who might be the public magicians accelerating things along today.
Yeah. I mean, it's movie magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's movie magic. I don't know much about the origin story of Oz. Like what sort of state was Oz in before the wizard showed up? I'd have to. Do you know much about the lore? Not that it really matters, but it might help us to understand that. And like the wizard here knows that he has no power in Wizard of Oz to like give the Tin Man a heart, or the straw man a brain, right? He gives them these like token gifts, and like they realize they had it inside of them all along.
Right. Yeah, their power is limited to what, like the individual believes.
I think there's a big lesson in that. There's a big lesson. Do you want to mind if I go to the next slide?
Sure.
All right. So this is a diversion. I just found this so profoundly interesting. I found that MGM is the studio that made The Wizard of Oz, and we've been talking about studios and studio heads, and this whole study got started with Kubrick giving John Calley, who was the head of Warner Brothers at the time, the unabridged version of The Golden Bough. And he would also be the head of MGM. But at the time of the Apollo landings, John Calley was at Warner Brothers. I found out that MGM was going to do this like Cleopatra filmed style of like an Apollo 11 documentary, but they abandoned it kind of at the last minute. And it passed through several hands. I believe they had, who's the guy? They had, who do they have? I guess they had a guy named Francis Thompson lined up to do it, but then he couldn't do it. And then it passed this guy named Theo Kemeke, who I believe had done, and we watched this 1965 film on the World's Fair, which interestingly enough, it's not what I thought it was about. Like a lot of the Apollo hardware debuted at the 1964 World's Fair, which this is about. And he ended up making this film that I'm talking about, which is Moonwalk 1. And I'm like 2/3 of the way through of it. It's absolutely amazing. It's really good. It doesn't get really a lot of fanfare, because I guess like there was like some fatigue when it finally came out. I think it came out in 1970 or 71. And I think by that time people were kind of like checking out of the moon landings and things like that. But it's an incredibly cinematic depiction of the events, mixed with like just kind of slice of life stuff, like the stuff I was watching before we got on here, were like the seamstresses that made the moon suits, and how they were talking, like how they were all compartmentalized, and one was
More
doing this.
threads.
Yeah. More threads. That's right. That's an excellent point. And they were sewing it by hand. That's actually a fantastic point. And so they had this like, Theo had all this amazing footage that MGM had abandoned. And what's so bizarre about it is that the movie starts off at Stonehenge. Moonwalk 1 starts off at Stonehenge. And there's this whole like opening thing about the magic circle. And we're starting there. And then we go all the way to the Apollo launch. It's like, why are we starting a documentary about Apollo 11 with the magic circle? So this kind of gets us back to that. And I guess there was this footage lay dormant for decades, and more recently, another film called Apollo 11. Who made what is it called? First Steps Edition was made recently from the same footage. So if I were to check that out, there's something else I wanted to say about it. Oh yeah, like the MGM, like when they first planned to do this before, they abandoned it like 6 weeks before the launch, but they originally were going to, like, a big part of it was like they were going to recreate the landing on a soundstage. Like that was the plan. Like to kind of make it more immersive or something. I'm not sure. And that didn't happen. And then I think it's interesting that they call it Moonwalk 1. All this suspicion about whatever happened really got going because I think in the late 70s, a film called Capricorn 1 was made by Peter Hyams, which, built this narrative about, a staged Mars mission, and people transferred what was being told there to an understanding of what happened with Apollo 11. Come to your own conclusions. What's so interesting is that Peter Hyams also directed the sequel to 2001 and not only did he direct the sequel to 2001, but he shares the same birthday as Kubrick. So they're both 726ers, and they both made these movies. So weird. So weird. Should we move on, or you want to say anything about this one?
I think I'm good.
Okay. All right. We're good.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A little bit more Wizard of Oz stuff. There's like Wizard of Oz Easter eggs all over the Apollo missions. This is one of my favorite ones, and I think most people know about this, but a woman who led the team who made the Apollo computer code is named Margaret Hamilton, which is totally crazy because she shares a name with the woman who played the Wicked Witch of the East. They're both named. So if you Google Margaret Hamilton, it's going to be confusing because you're going to get results for both of them. And I guess she leaned into it because she put like Easter eggs in the Apollo computer code, and she put some of, like, one of the more notable Easter eggs that she put in the computer code, and you can see her standing next to it. Like the computer code is taller than her. She put Wizard of Oz references in the computer code. She also put some like Shakespeare and Huey Long stuff too. But you can see here, there's the quote, "Please crank the silly thing around," and then off to see the wizard. This is just what's going on here. Like, reality is an effing trip.
Whatever the mechanism.
Yeah, whatever the mechanism. All right. Jordan made this next. I'm not good at technology, so Jordan made a couple of these graphs here. You can tell which ones are hers and which ones are mine that are in the presentation.
I don't know if they're much better, but
yeah. So we're going to be talking about chapter 4, magic and religion. And this is going to be a further attempt to answer the question about how magic and science are different. So first, I think we need to look at this Venn diagram, and especially the intersection of magic and science. So I think Jordan last time was asking me about this, and I was like, oh, like magic is not truth and science is truth, and they're maybe essentially the same. There are some differences, but there's a lot of commonality. So the commonality in nature, one event necessarily follows another without spiritual intervention or agency. So both science and magic posit that. There is faith in the uniformity of nature. Both magic and science possess conceived laws of nature. Breakage of these rules results in failure. Outcomes can be foreseen and calculated. There's no room for chance. Processes in nature are invariable. There's unbounded optimism about what can be achieved if one knows the mechanism of the world. Now, science, according to Frazer, is true and fruitful. It has the legitimate application of law of similarity and the law of contact. There's no spirits and there's no God. But with sympathetic magic, what happens there, where it goes astray, is that it misconceives particular laws that govern causality. So we talked about the law of similarity, but it's got an error that leads to homeopathic magic. And that error, from the last presentation, was, and this is what Frazer wrote, assuming that things that which resemble each other are the same, right? That somehow the voodoo doll is going to have some sort of effect on the person that it's a copy of. And two, the law of contact leads to contagious magic. Here, the error is assuming that things which have once been in contact with each other are always in contact. And because of these errors, sympathetic magic is false and barren. Magic may posit spirits, but constrains with spells and rules. There's no propitiation of a god because the magician is godlike. So we're getting clarity on these issues. So now this brings in religion. How does religion differ from, say, magic and science? Well, theoretically, there's a belief in a higher power that controls the course of nature and human life. And practically, what this results in is an attempt to propitiate or please the higher power. Assumes the course of nature is to some extent elastic or variable. And because the magician does not propitiate God, from the priest's perspective, is seen as blasphemous. So you tell me, Jordan, did that answer some of the questions that you had last time? Or is there, we're going to talk about some transitional figures here next, but what do you think? Do you remember your concerns from last time?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm reading through this section of the book, it does to me still seem like he's sort of saying the primary difference between magic and science is like getting the causal mechanism correct.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just interesting to me as someone who has studied different magic lineages or schools of thought. You know, this is one lens of categorization. I think there's probably others out there that contrast in different ways. But as far as really understanding what Frazer has to say about it, I think this is pretty clear. And he gives a lot of specific examples.
Yeah, I think it's a good working model.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just kind of surfing it. I'm just kind of riding with it. I'm sure at some point, like, we can tear this all apart. And there are lots of, like, probably true people who consider themselves to be magicians who have all sorts of problems with this. But I think for right now, it kind of works for me for right now.
It goes back to the linear evolution theory of culture is baked into a lot of this, and like the natural progression of one to the other to the next. I think that's the part where there's a lot more criticism in the anthropology field, but you know, we're dealing with the text as it is and just trying to make sense of it and grapple with it. Yeah, so I think this makes total sense. And yeah, all the themes throughout the Golden Bough and how they permeate through culture, they're there, you know, regardless of whether we think the theoretical underpinnings of how he would categorize them all is correct or incorrect is not super important, but it is important for kind of like understanding what he means.
Yeah. I mean, so I think a big thing that a lot of magicians would, I mean, this is like the honest and the sincere magicians is like, what are you talking about? False and barren. Like,
Right.
you know, or maybe like they would talk about, what do you mean about no propitiation of God? I believe in God. Like there's all sorts of nuance here.
Yeah, well, and it's a Venn diagram, so there's a lot of overlapping that probably happens in reality within even the cultures that Frazer is documenting.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the example you gave earlier, or you were reading from the text directly, where he was talking about, the public magician kind of fooling everyone, you know, I don't know if that is or is not true. Like, and I'm not sure that he had the data points to know if these people knew that they were pulling the wool over people's eyes or committing a great fraud.
Well, he says some of them are the most skilled ones.
Fair.
Yeah, right. But the other ones are sincere. I
Yeah.
think, even this idea that, science
Even that is laden with this idea that like the skilled one, the ones who like know that it's fake versus anyway, I don't want to belabor it.
I got you. I mean, the other thing you could pick apart here is like, are we certain that there isn't some sort of like spiritual interaction with science? Like, I mean, what's going on in quantum physics?
Exactly.
Like quantum physics seems to have all sorts of magical forces, like spooky action at a distance. Like, what are we talking about? Like, what are we talking about?
I believe he lightly mentioned some of the earlier conceptions of those ideas at some point in the text. So he's somewhat aware that sometimes these things can transition from being magic to becoming science as more data points become clear. But yeah, I mean that's
Is quantum physics magic on this understanding? Like, I mean, I know someone's like, oh no, Luke, you don't know anything. But it's like or like these atom smashers that keep finding smaller and smaller particles, like they start naming them after like spiritual entities. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I guess my takeaway from that comment is all things that are called magic aren't necessarily what mainstream culture thinks of as magic, and all things called science are not necessarily meeting the definition of science. And we could go down a whole Thomas Kuhn rabbit hole, the philosophy of science rabbit hole about that.
Yep, we could. But it's late.
It is late.
Well, I'm sure we'll circle back around to it. Let's go to slide 33.
Ooh, this is a fun slide.
33. Now I made this one. You can tell because it looks like
I like it.
It's like straight out of like 2005. That's about where
it's a vibe.
Yeah. So here we're talking about the transition, the evolution of religion out of magic. So with magic, we have magical rights over spirits and matter. But then we, as time goes on, there are these transitional figures. So like the priest and sorcerer remain combined. Propitiation and magical rites are done simultaneously. Frazer claims some peasants in his time in Europe believed priests to have magical powers. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more here at the Mass of Saint-Secaire. And then we get to religion, where the priest loads the magician for binding God's spirits with spells, thinks him blasphemous, and this makes the spirit world subject to a man. Magic is also foundational to religion. It's deduced immediately from elementary reasoning, says Frazer. A magic appears to be abundant in Stone Age cultures, but all cultures must pass through it. As the magical rites failed, shrewder individuals sought other methods and explanations. The magician posited unseen, more powerful beings that were not dependent on his magic. So in time, there's something else happening here that's beyond the magician's pure view. And slowly, the transition to religion is made when he realizes that he's completely dependent upon the divine and prostrates the unseen powers. I think I tried to say prostrates, not prostates. I'm sorry, that's quite the typo. My Pope GIF got in the way of my typing. Let me try it again. And prostrates the unseen.
Man, there are layers here. Layers of layers.
That is a hell of a typo.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What do you think?
I'm gonna keep some of what I think to myself.
Okay.
Yeah, this makes sense. Like, does this explain every place religion exists? I don't know, but I can kind of follow along with his line of thinking here as a theory, as a hypothesis of how it could come about. You know?
I mean, it's just, I mean, he's saying that everybody's going to pass through magic. It's like the most obvious thing when you're in the Stone Age. Like, can any civilization just skip ahead right to monotheism? And see, this is where like the Hegelian stuff is interesting. Like trying to understand the evolution of spirit or the absolute. I should say.
Yeah, I mean, when we start to universalize this or say like it must be this way, I get a little skeptical, to be honest. Yeah. But it's possible.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to this Mass of Saint-Secaire. I hope I'm saying that right. Do you speak French at all?
No.
Okay. I think it's Secaire. All right. So to illustrate a transitional phase between magic and religion, Frazer recounts the Mass of Saint-Secaire. This sounded familiar and led me to ponder if it inspired the backwards Mass scene in Eyes Wide Shut. Frazer writes, again, Gascon peasants believe that to revenge themselves on their enemies, bad men will sometimes induce a priest to say a Mass called the Mass of Saint-Secaire. Very few priests know this Mass, and 3/4 of those who do know it would not say it for love or money. None but wicked priests dare to perform the gruesome ceremony, and you may be quite sure that they will have a very heavy account to render for it at the last day. No curate or bishop, not even the Archbishop of Occ, can pardon them. That right belongs to the Pope of Rome alone. The Mass of Saint-Secaire may be said only in a ruined or deserted church where owls mope and hoot, where bats flit in the gloaming, where gypsies lodge of nights, and where toads squat under the desecrated altar. Thither the bad priest comes by night with his light of love, and at the first stroke of 11 he begins to mumble the Mass backwards, and ends just as the clocks are knelling the midnight hour. His layman acts as clerk. The host he blesses is black and has 3 points. He consecrates no wine, but instead he drinks the water of a well into which the body of an unbaptized infant has been flung. He makes the sign of the cross, but is on the ground and with his left foot, and many other things he does which no good Christian could look upon without being struck blind and deaf and dumb for the rest of his life. But the man for whom the Mass is said withers away little by little, and nobody can say what is the matter with him. Even the doctors can make nothing of it. They do not know that he is slowly dying of the Mass of Saint-Secaire. So clearly there are points of divergence between the scene in Eyes Wide Shut and the Mass of Saint-Secaire, but enough similarities to make it a plausible source of inspiration and something Kubrick lifted from the Golden Bough and others, as we shall see. This music that plays in the scene is a composition by Jocelyn Pook entitled Backwards Priests, and it features recordings of a Romanian Orthodox divine liturgy. The song was retitled Mass Ball for the soundtrack. In this slide, here is one phrase run forward and properly translated. I'm not going to try to say it as it exists originally, but it says, "Believe in the forgiveness of the sins of God's children." So, really the main thing that sticks out is, saying something religious backwards. There's this idea that is in the Golden Bough, but as we'll see, this gets communicated, whether through the Golden Bough or other sources, to Aleister Crowley. Crowley. And that's going to show up in other sources that I think are Kubrick is familiar with. And I would not be surprised if he got either from those sources or from the Golden Bough this idea to have the priest do his old backwards chant.
Mm-hmm.
So can't prove it, but I think it's there. It's interesting. So let's
there's tons of similarities, and we know Kubrick read it.
We do know that. All right, let's go to 35 and talk about some of those influences possibly.
Yeah.
So this was even if Kubrick wasn't aware of this stuff, which I think he probably was, it's fascinating to look into this anyways. So digging deeper into the Mass of Saint-Secaire opened up a research thread that appears limitless. We'll close with this examination and likely build on it as we progress through the Golden Bough. I think this will prove very fruitful if the audience sticks with me. So the bottom left-hand here, Aleister Crowley wrote a story based on the Mass of Saint-Secaire from the Golden Bough. This is from Goodreads, I believe. Or no, this is from the back cover. First published in the International magazine, February 1918, under the pseudonym Mark Wells, the Mass of Saint-Secaire was one of Aleister Crowley's Golden Twigs series, a collection of stories based on Frazer's Golden Bough. So Aleister Crowley, we can add this now to people who were profoundly influenced by the Golden Bough. Aleister Crowley, the air quotes wickedest man on earth, was inspired by this passage and wrote, was to say 8 different stories. You can actually find this Mark Wells, the Mass of Saint-Secaire stuff online. I listened to it with my robot reader. I thought about making it into an audiobook, but I don't particularly care to read aloud some of it. Uncomfortable with that. So if someone wants to find it, they can. Yeah, this was a big find. The fact that Aleister Crowley was so obsessed with the Golden Bough that it would take the time to write these things. My Google slides suck. Okay. And as far as the Golden Twigs from Goodreads, a little more information on that. The collection of 8 compelling tales intensely dramatizes themes drawn from the Golden Bough, from the ancient legend of the Sacred Oak of Nimai to Satanism in modern France. Like Poe's short stories, Magic, Murder, and Mystery, Magical Mystery Tour, are woven together into stories you won't forget. Written in America during the First World War, these creative retellings of folklore and legend are collected here for the first time, edited and annotated by Martin P. Starr, a scholar of Crowley's life and works, illustrated with a previously unpublished portrait of Crowley by Arnold Gente. So that's interesting. I mean, I feel like that's a really big discovery. I feel like that's a big find, and it's just going to get deeper. So we've been talking about the Beatles a lot here. So this is Sgt. Pepper's, right? And Crowley is on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's, So returning to our conversation concerning magic and mystery, here we see Aleister Crowley on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. This and other post-1966 Beatles albums are rumored, and seemingly rightly so, to include backwards messages, or backmasking, as it's more appropriately titled. Many of these messages, theorists believe, point to the replacement of Paul McCartney by a double. That aside, I think it would be reasonable to conclude that if there are backward messages on the records, it stems in part from what Crowley picked up from the Golden Bough and his own writings, such as those in Magic in Theory and Practice, where Crowley advised magicians in training to think backwards by external means. Listen to phonographic records reversed. One such instance of this phenomenon is the back-masked inner groove of Sgt. Pepper's that seems to say, "We will all be magic supermen." It's like that. So I think, and given how familiar Kubrick was with the Golden Bough, with the Beatles, I mean, we could talk for hours about the references between the Beatles and Kubrick, and I don't think it would do it justice. I think Kubrick knew about the backmasking. I think he knew about Crowley. I think he knew about Goldberg. I think he knew all about it personally. And because he knew, I think one of the ways he would have known about Crowley is because he was such a profound researcher and such a student of everything that he took on. I think he would have also learned about the connection with Jack Parsons, which we're going to get in here. I assume people who are watching this know about Jack Parsons.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. I'll talk a little bit about it. So it is hard to not speak on the Crowley, Golden Bough, Beatles, Kubrick connection without bringing attention to Jack Parsons. He was one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratories. He's a Thelemite, which was the religion that Crowley started. And in his youth, he was a voracious reader of the Golden Bough. So here we go. One of the founders of the modern space program, before he became a devotee of Aleister Crowley, was reading the Golden Bough. So there's something about this book that really touches people. The Parsons element of it will perhaps challenge our understanding of Kubrick's films and elucidate elements of the Babylon working ritual that Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard supposedly performed while working on rocket launches. Quickly, just wanted to point out that Parsons has a crater named for him on the dark side of the moon, which does not seem coincidental given that he is a figure that many in the space program would wish to never speak of. This accentuates that there is something almost Jungian about the moon itself with its dark and light side. And for those interested, Jung can also be found on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's.
Mm-hmm.
So quite the rabbit hole here.
Quite a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think the direct flow of information is unclear to me, but what is super obvious is the Golden Bough is the source text for so many things that it is so embedded in the fabric of our culture. It is insane.
Yeah, I was like, I put off doing this thing and I was like, is anyone going to care? Is it really that important? What, we're 3 videos in and I'm finding stuff like this. I'm like, what's it going to look like when we're done with this? You know, I was like, do I really want to devote myself to just studying Frazer? And when I'm so far into it, I was like, I'm not just studying Frazer. I'm studying everything.
Yeah. Inevitably everything comes up. And it's interesting to me, at this point, are we seeing echoes of the influence, or are people still being directly influenced by it?
It's a great question. I don't know. I've never met anyone else who's like, oh, hey man, did you read the Golden Bough? Like,
yeah,
I think the echoes are still there. I don't know. I don't know if it's even really taught in universities anymore. I mean, I studied philosophy, so I don't know if they're studying this in like anthropology or mythology courses or whatever. Probably excerpts. I doubt they're reading the whole thing.
Yeah, similar to when we learned about John Dee, I realized how much of what people think of as angels and angels' names and things like that all came from John Dee and his colleague. I forget his name.
Edward Kelly, I think.
Yeah, this is so similar. Like, there's so many things that I didn't know in terms of our perspective of magic. So much of it seems to just come directly from the Golden Bough.
Well, you speak of John Dee. I haven't even gone into that yet, but I think a lot of what Crowley was about was Enochian magic. He drew from Enochian magic. And I think I don't know the particulars of the Babylon working ritual, but I think it involved Enochian magic.
Mm-hmm.
There are recordings here. I've not listened to it. You can hear Crowley do some of his black magic recordings. There's like a playlist on Spotify.
How bizarre.
Yeah. It's on YouTube too, I think. Yeah. I thought it was interesting, that Parsons crater is kind of a circle. I wonder if that's like a magical circle reference, but anyhow.
Yeah.
I guess
and you said, people wanted to other people in the scientific community wanted to distance themselves from him. Is it just the Crowley connection, or is it something else?
I mean, it's the Crowley connection. It's the Babylon working ritual. It's the, it's like there were some charges of espionage.
Mm.
There was a suspicious death. A lot of people. There's some speculation that Parsons supposedly died accidentally blew himself up, but a lot of people think maybe there was foul play. There are a lot of different reasons. I mean, it doesn't look good if one of the fathers of the space program was like singing hymns to Pan. Like, how do you sell that to the American public, who at the time was like really religious? And how do you also the other side of it, scientists don't want to acknowledge these spiritual influences. So it ruffled the feathers of like serious engineers who didn't believe in any of this. And obviously it ruffled the feathers of a pious America. So
Nazis in NASA too. Quite the PR.
Yeah. Bad PR. It would have been very bad PR. Okay. So let's go to slide 36.
Oh boy.
So, if you don't know about the Babylon working ritual, I think there's a nice little piece of art that you should check out. So the story of Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons has been told many times over in recent years. However, the Claypool Linen Delirium, to my lights, do it best with their song Blood and Rockets, Movement 1, Saga of Jack Parsons, Movement 2, To the Moon. The song sounds at home on the Magical Mystery Tour, and it is only fitting that John Lennon's son would proffer the most creative interpretation of this eschewed history. One can see that Lennon et al. Are sensitive to the same subjects and symbolism that populate the presentations offered on my YouTube channel. The Claypool Linen Delirium entitled their first album, Monolith on Phobos, which is a reference to Buzz Aldrin revealing the presence of an artifact on a Martian moon during a call-in segment on C-SPAN. We've talked about this in connection with Buzz and his lost manuscript, The Myth of Apollo 11, the effects of the lunar landing on the mythic dimension of man. This the song that recounts this story of Jack Parsons is actually off the second Claypool Linen Delirium album called South of Reality. And I guess it goes without saying that the Claypool Linen Delirium features Les Claypool from Primus and the drummer from Cake, along with Sean Ono Lennon. So I want to talk about, I have not read it yet, but I feel like I'm going to have to read it. So this is a text in the top left-hand corner called Moonchild by Aleister Crowley. In the video, the Babylon working ritual is portrayed, and towards the end, the moon transforms into what is a clear reference to the Star Child from 2001. You can see that over here on the right-hand side. This challenges us to rethink what we've called the Star Child and connect 2001 to the Babylon working ritual. Did Kubrick know of it and encode it in his films? I think that's pretty likely given the research that he had to do for 2001. Also, it seems there are further symbolic hints to it in Eyes Wide Shut, which we will look at in the next slide. So the Moonchild, this is from Wiki as far as what was the Babylon working The Babylon working was a series of magic ceremonies or rituals performed from January to March 1946 by author, pioneer, and rocket fuel scientist and occultist Jack Parsons and Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. This ritual was essentially designed to manifest an individual incarnation of Babylon. The project was based on the ideas of Aleister Crowley and his description of a similar project in his 1917 novel, Moonchild. And as far as what happens in Moonchild, it's a novel written by the British occultist Aleister Crowley in 1970. I already said that. Its plot involves a magical war between a group of white magicians led by Simon If and a group of black magicians over an unborn child. It was published first by Mandrake Press in 1929, which is interesting because we talked about Mandrake from Strangelove in the last presentation. So, yeah, you should all watch this video. It's on YouTube. It's absolutely crazy. And to think about, that's a major thing. Like, how did I get there? Right. Like, does Sean Lennon know something like here? I guess when this band puts out this video, that's such a revelation. The song is amazing. The art is amazing. The truth narrative is absolutely amazing. Is Sean Lennon just like a regular dude, or does he know something that we don't know? And I think he knows things. Like, I think he's a smart guy. And I think when he has the moon transform into the Star Child, we should think really deeply about that, because it certainly would make aspects of 2001 make more sense. And it makes this narrative thread more obvious in Eyes Wide Shut, and I probably elsewhere, but I haven't picked up on it yet. What do you think?
It's wild. Would definitely recommend watching it. I mean, it's not that long compared to watching something like Magical Mystery Tour, which to me had tons in it, but it's not that long. If you have the eyes to see, I think it's very obvious what the takeaways are. Perhaps not, but it's just so much art in hindsight that I've taken in. In the past, I would have been like, oh, that's just so trippy or like so crazy.
Yeah.
It's not real.
I don't know. I wouldn't look at this video. I wonder, because this song in this video came out after I had my awakening. So I woke up in 2016.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine if I was still asleep, and I saw this video and I'd be like, what? It wouldn't look like art to me. It would look like something really important that I need to understand. But because I kind of already know what's happening here, it's just I don't know if someone's not awake and they look at that, what sort of experience they have. They just go, oh, that's cool. That's trippy.
Yeah, I don't know.
That would wake me up. I think it would definitely get me researching.
Yeah, I think it's super straightforward. Blood and rockets. Saga of Jack Parsons.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I guess the big thing here is sex magic, right? Which I don't know anything about really. But I think the idea is they were trying to give birth to this spirit. And we'll get to it. I think he wasn't convinced that the ritual worked, and he encountered this woman named Marjorie Cameron, Jack Parsons did, and saw her as sort of a manifestation of that. But I think it may have actually been effective in ways that we don't understand. I'm still trying to think through it. So,
do you believe in magic, Luke?
I don't know. It depends on what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a super answer.
I believe it is possible to alter the perception of reality.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I believe. And I think there is something mystical to that. But I'm not I'm still working it out. Still working it out. I think a lot of magic happens in the mind. But so is reality. So like if everything is mental, like what's the difference? Like, sure, you may not be able to like change the objective reality, but if you're changing the perceptions of individuals, what's the difference? Like we're all have a schema through which we're filtering things. So, okay, so let's go to slide 37. So I asked the question here, is there a narrative tie-in between Eyes Wide Shut and the Babylon working story? So, you know what? I got part of this was inspired by a thread I saw. Oh yeah. No, there's part of this was inspired by a thread I saw on Reddit, which I didn't include, but some of this is my own stuff too. I'll have to go back and find it. But the statistical impossibility of so many redheads in Eyes Wide Shut may be more than just an allusion to Freud's essay on the uncanny, which I've talked about elsewhere. Kubrick was very much influenced by Freud in this essay on the uncanny. You have so many different, you have this something statistically improbable showing up over and over again, supposed to give you this sense of something spooky, right? And perhaps some sort of messaging. Perhaps we are being pointed towards the Scarlet Woman, the role played by Marjorie Cameron in the Babylon working ritual. That doesn't feel too far off, given that there is a clear connection between Ishtar and her star in the film, though Babylon's star is 7 rather than 8-pointed. And this requires doing a deep dive on who the Babylonian goddess was and who Ishtar was, and if they can be connected. I don't have time to get into that today, but I think there's some likelihood here. Also, Tom Cruise, the film star, is one of the celebrities most identified with Scientology, though he had stepped away for a brief period during his marriage to Kidman. L. Ron Hubbard, prior to the creation of Scientology, performed the Babylon working ritual with Jack Parsons beginning on January 4th, 1946, which is kind of spooky because January 4th is my birthday. And also there's this mysterious naval officer figure in the film that may be a signal to L. Ron Hubbard, who once worked for naval intelligence. So I don't know what to say about this. Like, am I grasping at straws, or is there something really there? I find it interesting. I'm not sure. And, you know, I'm not here to do a whole thing on like the Babylon working in Kubrick, but I think there is reason to go deeper into this.
I mean, the Ishtar connection is.
Yeah. I mean, that's very obvious. Yeah.
Is it a light inspiration? I guess that's another question, right? Like, is it, oh, this is just interesting, we're going to take elements of this because they're compelling visually and like the storytelling is compelling? Or is he really trying to bring in these specific rituals, these specific symbols, and represent them or show them to the audience?
Well, that's a great point. Like, this goes back to one of the first slides about whether or not cinema is magic. Is there something ritualistic happening here in the film, or is he just trying to make allusions to it and tell, and like to, because there's people keep coming back to Kubrick's films because they find new details, a new layer of interpretation. Is this just a way to make himself continually relevant long after he's dead? Like, I know what I'll do. I'll put all these like crazy Easter eggs and all these codes and things like that. And I'll only have to make 13 films, but people will be obsessed with them forever and ever, and I'll live on. Yeah. That'll be my legacy.
Well, and it starts to make more sense how that would be doable going back and reading the text that inspired him so much. Like, if you're lifting from these things, there's less you have to kind of keep track of. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but like it makes it seem more reasonable that someone could pull that off.
Yeah.
Dipping into this well.
Well, I have no evidence that Kubrick, I want to say this, like practiced any sort of ritualistic magic.
Oh yeah, we have no idea.
I'm tempted to my spidey sense tells me that he's alluding to something that happened in the past. I'm not sure, or is happening. I'm not sure in these films if I wouldn't say that he's acting it out. Kubrick's takes on religion are a little bit hard to scrutinize. I think somewhere he said that he didn't believe in like an Abrahamic God. I think he sounds Gnostic to me a little bit. Kubrick sounds like a Gnostic to me, but that's a whole other presentation. If we can go to the slide 38, all this is what I thought was so interesting talking about this interaction between Crowley and Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard is that in a way we have Frazer's views on magic, science, and religion all represented. However, as we will see in the next slide, these figures don't really neatly conform to Frazer's categories, and Parsons and Hubbard may be better seen as transitional figures. Students of Crowley may contend that he was not just a magician, but also religious in a certain way. But, we have Crowley, the magician, and Parsons, the rocket scientist, and Hubbard, the man who starts a religion. But yeah, it does fit well, but it's not so neat. As someone from Wikipedia, if you go to slide 39, I guess influences on and by L. Ron Hubbard's beliefs and practice. Source from Ortega et al. 2020, rendered in the mode of W.S. Bainbridge. But like this shows like some of the influences that Hubbard had when he created Scientology, and it shows the Crowley and OTO, which came from the Golden Dawn, which came from other brotherhoods and whatnot, and the Freudian element.
Dawn, a nod to Golden Bough.
I think it's worth exploring. I don't know. I'll put a pen in that. We'll make a note of that.
And he was inspired enough to write a book.
Well, Crowley didn't start the OTO. He joined it. And I feel like the OTO, or maybe I'm wrong about that. No, what I'm talking about is the Golden Dawn. Crowley didn't start the Golden Dawn. He joined it. So, and he started the OTO. Is that right? I think so.
I don't know.
Started. I mean, I hate. Yeah. Oh, maybe he was initiated into that. He didn't. Yeah, I'll look into it. But anyhow, I don't know. I'm not sure. I have a feeling the Golden Dawn predates the Golden Bough. I don't know. And it doesn't look like Crowley started the OTO either. So I'll look into that a little bit more. But anyhow, regardless, Hubbard had a lot of influences that one might say wouldn't necessarily meet. Maybe it would not meet I don't know enough about Scientology, but maybe it wouldn't meet Frazer's definition of what a religion is. So that'd be an interesting study. Is Scientology a religion based on this definition? So someone wants to look into that. And I think, just to close out, Jordan had this diagram that she made for me. This is a work in progress, but as time goes on, we're seeing all the different groups of people that have been profoundly influenced by the Golden Bough. You've seen us talk about its influence in music, such with the Doors, and poetry with T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, film, Apocalypse Now, and then also in Kubrick, philosophy with Eliade, Wittgenstein, comparative mythology with Joseph Campbell, psychology with Jung and Freud, specifically his book Totem and Taboo, And now we have this branch here with the occult, with Crowley and the Golden Twigs, and the influence on Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard in the Babylon Working. So a lot going on here. And this little float, this little, what do we call this? We call this a genealogical chart. I'm not sure what the exact term is for it, but this is going to get crazier and crazier, and a lot of these things, they cross pollinate. So
Yeah.
it's going to grow over time. So that's what I have prepared for tonight. And I imagine if we started at 11, it's 12:45 now. So let's bring this one to a close.
Sounds good.
All right. See you later.
Bye.